As the Turks conquer the Arab world, they inherit coffee and coffee culture. Soon, coffee secures a place for itself in the everyday lives of ordinary people. And although coffee is still enjoyed in many domestic rituals, Turkish men come to prefer the public coffee houses.
Evimizde bir kahve kültürü var, kahve içme kültürü var. Sonra erkekler arasında toplanma yeri açısından bir kahve. İlk başlarda böyle namaz aralarında bir soluklanmak, bir vakit geçirmek amaçlı, sohbet etmek amaçlı. Oraya genelde Türk entelektüelleri, yazarlar, şairler, edebiyatçılar gidiyorlar. Orada sohbet ediyorlar. Çeşitli tartışmalar yapılıyor. Hatta bugün ankormanların televizyonlarda bildiğiniz üzere günlük gazeteleri okurlar ve yorumlar yaparlar. İşte o zamanlar insanların tartıştığı, bilgi alışverişinde bulundukları bir yer olarak biliniyor. Kahve ve kahvehane özellikle insanların sohbet edip tartışmaları için, bir araya gelmeleri için çok önemli bir yer. Kahve de bunun için çok önemli bir araç. Ayrı bir atasözümüz vardır. Gönül ne kahve ister ne kahvehane, gönül dostu ister, kahve bahane.
Coffee has always been important for both the men and women in Turkey. But with the strict separation of the sexes, women have long been forbidden in the coffee houses. Even today, a young woman can still have her future divined in the grounds of her cup.
Kahve bizim kültürümüzde önemli bir yeri vardır. Kahve falı ve kahvenin. Örneğin bir genç kız evlenmeyi düşündüğü, evlilik çağındaki bir genç kız öncelikle görücü olarak gelen kişilere, kendisini görmeye gelen kişiler için niyetini belirten bir ifadeyle kahvenin içine tuz ya da şeker, eğer istiyorsa şeker, istemiyorsa tuz koyarak sunar ve karşısındaki insan da yine aynı şekilde eğer gerçekten ve karşıdaki insanın tepkisini de özellikle gözlemlerler. Eğer karşısındaki insan istiyorsa bu kişiyle evliliği, inzivacı diyeyim, kahveyi her ne olursa olsun kahvede içinde tuz ya da şeker içer.
Terazi burcu toprak mı?
Terazi hava, topraksınız ama.
As the taste for coffee grows, the Turks become more vigilant about protecting their beloved bean.
It was a very jealously guarded commodity, particularly after the Ottoman Turks took over. They spread coffee far and wide throughout the Ottoman Empire. So this was obviously something that they didn't want anybody to be able to grow besides them. So they were very careful to keep the monopoly. Before they exported any coffee beans, they would parboil them to make sure that they weren't fertile, that they couldn't be grown. So it became this precious commodity that people tried to smuggle out. Eventually, an Indian named Baba Budan, this is probably true, he taped some seeds around his stomach underneath his clothing and smuggled them out and began to grow some in India. Then the Dutch got hold of some fertile seeds and began growing them in their greenhouses in Amsterdam.
From Holland, the Dutch transport the precious coffee plant to their colony in Java. There, they enslave the natives and force them to cultivate coffee. By 1683, mocha and Java are the most sought-after beans, and coffee is poised to conquer Europe along with the armies of the Sultan.
It was during a siege of Vienna by an Arab Sultan who had sent a tremendous army to conquer the West. And he made his way to the gates of Vienna, and he surrounded Vienna. He was about to conquer the city.
All of Europe was in the balance. They were trying to figure out who they could send to try to get some sort of reinforcements. There was a Pole named Franz George Kolschitsky who had lived in Arab lands and who spoke the language. So he dressed up as an Arab. He snuck out through the lines,
delivered a message to the French troops that they needed help. The French came, they defeated the Arabs, and the Arabs fled. In their haste, they left behind their bags of unroasted coffee.
Nobody knew what they were. They thought they were camel fodder, so they were burning them. Kolschitsky smelled it, and he said, "Oh, that's coffee. Don't burn that. I'll take it if nobody else wants it."
Having lived among the Turks, Kolschitsky knows the rudiments of roasting and brewing coffee. He soon opens the Blue Bottle, Vienna's first coffee house. Like the Turks, he adds sugar to sweeten the cup.
People in Vienna didn't like the grounds in the bottom, so they started to filter it. And they didn't like the raw taste of just plain coffee, so they started adding milk to it. And it's the way that we have it today.
Cheese.
Chin chin.
While the Viennese introduce the modern way of drinking coffee, the perfection of coffee culture takes place in Italy. But wherever it appears, there is also resistance to the exotic new beverage.
For some reason, coffee arrived in Europe with negative connotations about it. It was almost as if there was an advance warning coming. Something bad is coming, which everybody's going to like. The Turkish men went to coffee houses where they drank coffee without women. They also went to bathhouses without women, and some of the Turkish regiments had homosexuals in them. And consequently, the connection of coffee as the Turks drink meant that there was an association that coffee made you effeminate. And that was an attitude that was brought over to Venice. So there was a whole lot of ideas which stuck in people's minds because largely the whole Muslim world was closed off to the West.
Italian priests regard the Turkish foreigners and their black brew as a threat to Christianity. They petition Clement VIII to ban the evil Muslim practice of drinking coffee. But when the Pope tastes it, he reputedly finds the drink so delicious, he decides to baptize it instead. Soon, more and more contact is being made as the Turks begin to trade with Venice.
Tramite questi mercanteggi Venezia offriva qualcosa e la Turchia logicamente contraccambiava con il caffè. È stata presa con un po' di scetticismo all'inizio dai veneziani e poi dopo l'apertura del Florian nel 1720, che è stato praticamente il primo caffè che è stato aperto qui a Venezia, un po' alla volta i veneziani sono abituati a questo caffè. I 30 anni successivi credo siano stati aperti più di 200 caffè qui a Venezia. C'era il caffè per le persone borghesi, diciamo, e anche per i ricchi. Insomma. Il Florian era uno di questi, per gente ricca, ecco.
Venetians may be taking a liking to coffee, but they're keeping their distance from Turks and other outsiders.
The Caffè Lavena in St. Mark's Square was well known in the 18th century because at that age Venetians didn't want to meet foreigners. So the Lavena was the foreigners' coffee shop, and the Venetians didn't come here because they come in the opposite side to the Florian. So it was a meeting point, the Lavena, for all the tourists of that age. Caffè L'Avena is well known as the Richard Wagner's cafe because he used to stay here every afternoon at 5 o'clock with his wife and his children, speaking to the owner of this coffee shop. That was Carlo L'Avena, my great-grandfather. Here he was in the upper gallery writing the finest pages of Tristano und Isolde, or the second act of the Parsifal. And he stayed here also with other musicians, and they made a sort of circle of musicians in this coffee shop.
The German Richard Wagner composes at the L'Avena, while the Italian Giuseppe Verdi composes at the Florian. Neither would think of crossing the piazza to meet the other. As Wagner and Verdi battle musically, others are dreaming of love, and coffee is their elixir. Since the Florian and the L'Avena are frequented by women, the notorious Casanova spends hours in both cafes. As one of the few Venetians seeking romance on either side of the square, he is commemorated with a seductive coffee named just for him.
We are going to have our Casanova coffee. This is the secret recipe with the spices, and this is the espresso. We are going to mix them. And to put on the top the whipped cream. We call Casanova coffee because the recipe is really ancient, and we took these spices from the 18th century. So if you go and test this kind of coffee, the mix is really incredible.
Italians love their coffee and have greatly enriched the world's coffee culture.